There are a total of 95 Sonic the Hedgehog games that have officially been released, but if we look at the amount of cancelled Sonic games, it would make up more than 1/5 of the amount of games that were released. Like every series, Sonic has projects that never finished development. Hell, some didn't even make it past conceptualization or even the pitching stages. But for some reason, the Sonic series just has an astounding amount of cancelled games, more than any series that I'm aware of. So today, I want to look over every cancelled Sonic game, port, and sequel, and see what went wrong in development. And I've been meaning to make this video for a long time, so I don't want to wait any longer. Let's start off with the earliest game. Starting shortly after the release of Sonic's first game in 1991, the game was supposed to have you go around as Sonic in this level hub to complete different educational levels to try to beat the motor bug that Sonic is racing. So basically, if you're just too stupid, you'll lose the race. There were 15 educational levels with varying difficulty that gives you some more time to solve the questions. There are also 3 mini games that existed in the game. One is a balloon level where you pop as many balloons as possible, a trampoline level where you had to use it to get Sonic to the other side of a ravine, and a more traditional, with massive quotes on traditional, Sonic level where you have to jump to avoid stuff on the ground and pop balloons to gain points. The game was developed by Terry Dex in the UK, but the game never got approved for publishing, so the game just ended up being scrapped. Honestly though, I don't think any kids were really raving to get their hands on the next Sonic educational game. Oh, yeah, I guess that exists. Up next is Sega Sonic Bros. This game was going to be a falling puzzle game in a similar vein to Puyo Puyo. This game featured iconic characters like Sonic, Yellow Sonic, Red Sonic, and everyone's favorite, White Sonic. There were 2 modes, 1 versus CPU and 1 versus 1. The first mode had you compete against Eggman's CPU, and the more tiles that you clear and the more points that you can get a Chaos Emerald. And once you reach level 30, White Sonic joins up and makes it more difficult. The game reaches an end when you reach level 99 or get a score of 9,999,990. And a message goes on screen saying, "Congratulations! Thank you for playing, level 99 clear. You are super player." And there was also a 2-player mode, which was basically the same, but you go up against your friend. But unfortunately, the game did poorly in playtests in Japan, and the cabinet was considered lost all the way until 2016 when a board collector, Showtime, found it, and it wasn't until 2018 where it was made fully playable. So yeah, it's neat that we have this game still available to us. Up next is Sister Sonic. Going back to 1992, Sega teamed up with Nihon Falcom to create Sega Falcom, and for their first game they wanted to take a game called Pop Full Mail and basically asset swap it with Sonic characters, including the aforementioned Sister Sonic, who was described as a bounty hunter and, I quote, "a more sexy and flirtatious version of Sonic with a more cutesy appearance." Alright bro, this is the 3rd fucking time bro. This game was going to be an RPG and released on the Sega CD, but the game was cancelled, thankfully, after Sega Falcom got a bunch of angry letters about the game. So instead of making it, they just decided to make an actually faithful remake of Pop Full Mail. I don't even know what was going on through their heads, bro. They must have been on something in the 90s, man. Oh yeah! Up next is Treasure Tales, a puzzle adventure game featuring Tails. So this one is kind of interesting. This game was pitched back in February of '93 by Sega Technical Institute game designer Bill Dunn. What's funny is that Bill Dunn claimed that he had nothing to do with the game. Craig Stitt, former art director at Sega, doesn't remember this game either. Honestly, no one from back then really remembers it. Not even the former director of global marketing at Sega of America remembers this. But it wasn't until August 17th, 2020, after Stitt found a resume with a video of the game that was put together in '95, where it was eventually shown to the public. So yeah, it's an interesting case. But man, poor Tails. He always gets done dirty when it comes to spin-offs. Up next is something that I've never heard of before, a game called AstroPede, formerly named SegaPede. This game is very interesting because it's a Sonic game technically. The game takes place in the Sonic universe and it looks like a Sonic game to an extent. Craig Stitt and a bunch of the Sonic Spinball guys were tasked to make a new game, and they wanted it to make it part of the Sonic universe while featuring a new character named Zip, who is this robot centipede created by Dr. Robotnik, and he would eventually become friends with Sonic. The game, though, never made it past the prototypes. The game was starved for resources because Stitz's team were tasked to make so many projects at the same time. Hell, the game was using hidden palace assets from Sonic 2, so eventually the game was shelved. But Stitz still wanted to revive the game eventually, renaming it from SegaPede to AstroPede, but unfortunately the game was cancelled in the end. I hope someday that we get to see a playable build of this, because this looks very intriguing. Up next is Sega Sonic CottonCandy Scramble. This machine is quite similar to Sega Sonic Popcorn Shop, where you play a small minigame to get cotton candy from Sonic. This machine, however, was never released, besides one time at the Japanese amusement machine show in 1994, and it has never been seen since. Up next is Sonic Sports, which was gonna be a Sonic game about playing the piano. There isn't much known about the game besides one blurb from a magazine article saying the game would be similar to Acme All-Stars, but using Sega characters like Sonic, Tails, and Ristar. And some of the sports would be like basketball and volleyball, but that's really it. Up next, we have what is probably the most infamous and well-known cancelled Sonic game, Sonic X-Treme. Now, there is so much here that I could talk about that I could make a whole video on it, which I have, and you can watch it right here in the top right link right there. So I'm only going to save the most essential stuff for this video. In 1995, the Sega Saturn was released, and Sonic Team was just coming off the success of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, so they wanted to keep the momentum going, no pun intended. So, to try and evolve like everybody else, they wanted to make the jump into the third dimension. So, the game started development in Sega of America, and the idea of the game was to have Sonic running around these weird tube levels with this weird fisheye lens, and the game originally was going to be made for the 32X, but then that was scrapped, so they moved it to this next Sega cartridge-based console that never ended up being made. So, the game landed on the Saturn, where it would eventually die. The game's development itself faced a bunch of different issues. They had a lot of ideas going into this game, but they were starved for resources. They wanted 4 characters with Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and newcomer Tiara, I'm not saying her last name, and for them to all have their own playstyles. And they even had to make 2 separate engines for the regular levels and the boss levels, since they play so differently. And they had to do this all before holiday of 96. So, in March of 96, when the game had a progress check, the Sega of Japan representatives were super impressed with the boss level engine that they wanted the whole game to play like that instead. But a lot of work was already done on both engines, and so they couldn't really just swap everything onto one engine in a timely manner. That's when the Nights into Dreams engine was offered to them to speed up development, and it was a no-brainer, and the effects were showing. For the first few weeks they had the engine, development actually sped up a bit. But that's when our favorite criminal, Yuji Naka, got wind of this, and he was not happy. He was so angry that he threatened to leave Sonic Team if they kept using his engine. And nothing of value would have been lost. So, reluctantly, the team had to stop using the Knights engine, and a lot of their development was reset since they couldn't reuse a lot of the code from the Knights build. So, with 9 months until the deadline, the team was in dire straits. It didn't help them that the 2 programmers, Coffin and Sen, were both extremely ill and couldn't work on the game anymore, so the game was officially cancelled in August of 97. Though the game was cancelled, the game wasn't lost. Over the years, assets from the game slowly started to make its way onto the internet, like gameplay videos, sprites, and even a playable prototype. And honestly, I'm kind of glad this game was cancelled. It's better that it was left unfinished and cancelled than it released in the state that it was in. And to be honest, it just doesn't look that fun. Up next is Sonic Saturn, which was a project that was being developed alongside of Sonic X-Treme. Though neither game shared any code or assets, the game was never really developed into a full game because Yuji Naka was just not impressed by it. But they did try to implement some of the ideas into X-Treme, like the special stage. The game also had this game mode called Sonic Pool. We actually have a quote from the developer, Peter Morowick, about how the game would work. The idea was that Sonic would run around to position himself behind a ball, go into a stationary spin dash, then you could aim your direction and let go. The camera went overhead to show the results actions as he smashed into the other balls. The goal was to put all the balls away within 1 minute or some such time limit. He could also push into the balls, but that wasn't very fast and thus wasn't the preferred way to play. In later stages, there were these little enemies crawling around, making your job more difficult. There were some other arenas in the works, such as a southwestern courtyard and etc. But yeah, nothing really came from this prototype. And kind of quickly moving on, we have one more game in the Saturn and 32X era of Sonic called Sonic Mars, which was an unreleased spin-off made for the 32X. This game tried to make an attempt to incorporate the Sonic cartoon cast like Sally and Bunny into the game. And in the concept arts, we even see Eggman taking on a more Sat-AM Robotnik look. And even the characters like Tiara from Sonic X-Treme was in the game. The gameplay itself would take place across 6 different zones with 6 different characters: Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Sally, Bunny, and Tiara. We even have concept gameplay with Sonic running across these platforms in like the space area. And looking at the concept art, we can also see that characters were going to be able to talk to Sonic through radio comms. But eventually, due to the scope being too big for the 32X, they canceled the game and moved on some of the assets to work on Sonic X-Treme. Up next, we have Sonic X Chaos Emerald Chaos. That's a fucking great name. This was actually made for the Game Boy Advanced Video Pal and would have featured episodes 3 and 4 of Season 1 of Sonic X, but was cancelled due to complications. Up next, we have Sonic the Shadow World, that was going to be made for the PSP, but the game never even made it past the pitch, so we literally have nothing about this game except for the title. Up next is Sonic X-Treme, not to be confused with Sonic X-Treme. No, this is Sonic X-Treme. This cancelled Sonic game was a prototype for a skateboarding Sonic game developed by Visionscape Interactive in 2003. This game seemed to take a lot of hints from Tony Hawk Pro Skater. The game even had different modes, like a mission mode where you need to collect these keys to get a Chaos Emerald, combat mode where 2 players could compete to collect as many keys as possible, and a race mode, which is pretty self-explanatory. But a lot of these features seemed unfinished. Like mission mode would just crash after level 1, and race mode had no end. Eventually, a prototype was found in 2011, so we have the game preserved at least. The game looked interesting, but I think what they did with Riders later down the line is more fitting for Sonic. Up next, we have Sonic the Hedgehog Awakening. Now, something crazy is that we don't even know if this game existed because it was cancelled before it was announced, and there are no screenshots or videos of the game. The only proof of this game's existence is that the voice actor for Silver, Pete Capella, was credited to be in a game called Sonic Awakening, so we don't even have like an official word of this game's existence. Up next is Sonic Central. No, not that one. No, not that one either. It seemed like it was going to be this like hub app for Sonic news and was supposed to release in 2015, but nothing ever came of it. Maybe that's what they repurposed Sonic Centrals into, just a hub for Sonic news, which is an interesting thought. Up next is a game simply called Sonic Demo, showed to Sonic Team in 2021 and made by Nitrome. It was going to be a Sonic mobile game where Sonic would run up the wall to try to get as high as possible to get to a capsule at the top. And the game actually looked really fun, having you retain your momentum by bouncing on enemies and wall jumping. But for some reason, Sonic rejected their proposal. But thankfully, the core gameplay would be used to make their own game called Super Leap Day. So thankfully, it wasn't all in vain. Up next is Sonic 16. This game was pitched to Sega as a video game adaptation of the Sat-AM Sonic show. There was a prototype video of the game that was shown to Sega that had Sonic sneaking around this area that appeared like Robotropolis. A lot of the game looked really slow and had Sonic taking on a more stealthy approach to the gameplay. And it even showed some new moves like a buzzsaw or a needle attack, and it even featured Sally at the end. But Yuji Naka gave it the thumbs down ultimately, for at the time the pitch was made, and this is a quote by Peter Morwick, the gameplay designer for the demo, the cartoon wasn't even out yet, so banking on its success would have been premature, as too many spin-offs for a fresh new franchise are likely to do more harm than good. And honestly, I'm glad the game wasn't made. It looked too much of a departure for what Sonic was known for, even especially at the time. What he said about banking off of a show that wasn't even out yet makes complete sense. Now I want to talk about a couple of cancelled Sonic sequels. Up first is the infamous Sonic 4 Episode 3. Now, for those who know, Sonic 4 was supposed to be a trilogy of games. That's why Episode 2 left off of a cliffhanger. But, due to poor reception of both games, they ended up cancelling the third game, leaving the trilogy unfinished. So now the canon event is that Little Planet is now trapped in an Eggman show. Fucking pity. Up next, we got a sequel to Sonic Chronicles, dear fucking god. If you don't know what Sonic Chronicles is, good. But if you still want to be burdened by the knowledge, Sonic Chronicles was a Sonic RPG made for the DS, and somehow this game got approved for a sequel. But then a man by the name of Ken Penders caused Sega a lot of legal trouble because he claimed that the Echidna characters in the game belonged to him. And I'm not gonna get into this whole issue, but all of this just led to Sega realizing this trouble was not worth it, so they canceled the sequel. Up next, we got a cancelled third Storybook Game. Now, there is no confirmation if this game has ever been even started development, but there was a survey that asked Sonic fans what they would like to see in a third Storybook Game, and the themes included film noir, Greek mythology, horror, sci-fi, western, and other. Now, again, there is no confirmation if the game was even made or even started development, but if I were to choose, I would have loved to see a Greek mythology type game. Just the setting would fit the ancient story vibe that the Storybook games were going for, and it would have just been really cool to see Sonic characters and the Greek gods they would represent. Now that we finished talking about all of the cancelled sequels, we are on the final stretch. We are going to talk about cancelled ports, because there are some interesting ones here, like the Sonic 1 home computer port. No official date was given, and in one magazine screenshot, we can see the game looking completely different. Now, I'm not sure if this was a stylistic choice, or the game was actually going to look like this, but the game never had a port back in 91 ever, so it really didn't matter. Then we have the CD ports of Sonic 1 and 2. For Sonic 1, it was revealed at Summer CES in 92, and was going to be the original game with just higher quality music. And for Sonic 2, the game was also planned to be ported, but due to sales in Japan not doing nearly as well as in America, they decided that it wasn't worth it and decided just to make Sonic CD in the end. Up next is Sonic 3 Limited Edition for the Sega Genesis. The idea of this game was going to be Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles combined into one cartridge like it was originally intended, but they just ended up not being able to do it, and they released Sonic & Knuckles in 94 with the lock-on technology. Up next is Sonic Riders for the Game Boy Advanced. Sonic Riders for the Game Boy Advance. This game was originally going to be an Outrun style game, but Sega of Japan insisted on adding more 3D to the game. For Sonic Riders on the Game Boy Advanced, more 3D on Sonic Riders for the Game Boy. Yeah, so that didn't happen, and the game was cancelled because they couldn't make the game for the fucking Game Boy Advanced. Whoa, what's the thought? Okay, whatever, that's... Up next is the Wii port for Sonic 06. So, when they were making the game, they wanted to make a Wii port, but when they got a dev kit from Nintendo, they realized that they wouldn't be able to do it because it wouldn't run on the console without freaking crashing. So, they took half of the team to go make Secret Rings and just canceled the Wii port altogether. And the PC port was also planned, but nothing really came out of it. Up next is Sonic Generations for the DS, Wii, and PSP. Now, these ports were going to be similar to the 3DS version where they had different stages for each version. There is no confirmed reason why they were cancelled, but my guess is that they just didn't want that many versions of the game to be out, and they wanted to keep it as simple as possible as to not confuse people into what version they need to get. Up next is the Windows Phone port of Sonic 4 Episode 2. Originally, it was going to drop on July 2012, but for unknown reasons, the port was cancelled. And since we're on mobile ports really quick, let's switch over to the Sonic 3 and Knuckles port for the mobile phone. And it was going to be in the same vein as Sonic 1 and 2 by the Taxman. Christian Whitehead himself even made a proof of concept for Sonic Team with a working port of Sonic 3 on iPhones, but Sonic Team turned down the prototype for now obvious reasons. But at least we have the advanced versions on Origins after they changed the music, but that's neither here or there at this point. And finally, we have the Sonic Mania 3DS port. So, when Sonic Mania was announced, developer Renegade Kid offered to make the 3DS port of the game, but after the studio went through a split in August of 2016, the port had to be dropped. there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. I believe I've covered every single canceled Sonic game, sequel, and port that has ever been scrapped. The fact that there's so many scrapped Sonic games is astounding. I don't think any other franchise has this many canceled games. But again, it is fun to look at all of them and just to see the variety of games. But honestly, for most of them, it kind of makes sense why a lot of them were canceled. And some, honestly, for the better. But that's really all I have to say for today, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment down below. What was your favorite canceled Sonic game or the most interesting one? And did I miss one? Because I feel like I got them all. Maybe I found some random one that no one's ever heard of, but who knows? Thank you all for watching. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time. I've been wanting to make a big video in general for a long time. It's been a while since I did it. And yeah, that's really all I gotta say for today. I hope y'all enjoyed, and if you did, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye!